I've been managing type 1 diabetes for 27 years, and right now, for the first time in a long time, I'm tired of it. Not in a crisis sort of way, but in a quiet and accumulated, I don't want to think about my blood sugars kind of way. And before I make any kind of video about education or practical tips for glucose management, I want to start here because it is the most honest place that I can start. My name is Tyler Nelson, and my goal for this channel is to talk about type 1 diabetes, glucose management more broadly, and the intersection between self-management and the mental health toll of that self-management. I've spent the better part of the last year throughout the course of my fourth pregnancy, accumulating, compiling the resources that I've used across all four of my pregnancies for helping me feel capable and helping me manage type 1 through those. And this isn't the first video that I expected to make. I generally feel really confident about glucose management, and I feel really confident about how I'm getting the information from my CGM and making changes on my own, how I'm moving throughout my day. But right now I find myself in a place of frustration and disengagement. And like I said, this isn't the first video that I plan to make, but I have a feeling that other people can relate to this point in, or to this feeling within the context of managing a chronic health condition. Let's start with what diabetes burnout is and talk about some distinctions. Obviously, diabetes burnout doesn't exist in a vacuum. So there are other things that can complicate or make it more challenging to cope with. But the way that I like to think about self-management is a relationship. So the information that I get from my body, from my blood sugars, from all of the aspects of dealing with type 1 or generally just glucose management, that's feedback for me, and I'm responding to that feedback, and that feedback responds to my actions, just like in a relationship with another person. Of course, it's a relationship with yourself at the end of the day, but I think about it like a relationship. And so the analogy that I would make for diabetes burnout is when you become disengaged from that relationship in some facet or another. With diabetes burnout, broadly, the way that it would be described in terms of identifying that you're in that experience would be not wanting to look at your CGM or check your blood sugar, intentionally or almost forgetfully not bolusing for the food that you're going to eat, not planning ahead or thinking about your blood sugars, not engaging in the types of behaviors that have historically helped you manage the day-to-day aspects of living with type 1, living with any kind of management of your blood sugars. For me right now, it is complicated by the fact that I had a fourth baby. I've got 4 kids and I'm home with them most of the time. But I can feel sort of the texture of it is like not wanting to meal plan. I don't want to think about the food that I'm eating because I don't want to have to do the math. My brain doesn't have space for the math of it all. I'm not remembering like, oh, I should pre-bolus. So then I get to the meal and I'm like, oh, okay, now I have to wait if I want to have things go well with my blood sugar. It doesn't always work to get out for the exercise that I want when I want to, or when my mind has capacity for it. That's where I find myself right now. And those things are atypical for me. So there's also a personal component, like what is your norm, and the deviation from that norm. Specifically related to postpartum, obviously, there's realities of mood, anxiety, things like that with go on for moms postpartum, separate from type 1, but the hormonal adjustments that are happening generally with postpartum can be compounded by the hormonal realities of type 1. And I think about, your cortisol and the way that that's changing. If you're nursing, which I am, the way that prolactin impacts blood sugars. All of these things are running in the background, and even with the amazing technology that exists for CGMs and the hybrid closed loop systems and things like this, there's still constant management. And of course, there's a an alarm for me right now. But the mental math that's required is sort of compounded when you're combining postpartum and type 1. So I think that the likelihood or the chance of experiencing burnout in your postpartum is going to be understandably higher because pregnancy is one of the most demanding periods of management for any type 1 diabetic woman. Targets are tighter, the stakes they feel higher and they are higher, and your body is coping with the other aspects of change that are going on with pregnancy. And then postpartum, you have a release of that level of management. You don't have to be as hypervigilant. You sort of get to ride a little bit of the waves there. But the reality is that you've spent 9 months and more because you're prepping for pregnancy too. So probably more like a year that you've spent dedicated to ensuring your blood sugars are within these tight targets. And all of a sudden, you don't technically have to anymore. There's a little bit less guilt if your blood sugar isn't within that tight range. And by guilt, I just mean like how it feels internally. But you're also taking care of another human. And I think it's maybe best to think about it like general burnout or maybe postpartum depression or anxiety and diabetes burnout. They're not additive. They multiply one another, and each one sort of feeds into the other. So for me, I always have found myself to be more anxious postpartum. I've always found myself to have a lot of other things going on in my mind and sort of running in the background, and then adding the mental math amplifies those anxious thoughts. Again, some of the feelings that might come up is just that sense of overwhelm, the sense of knowing what you should do or what you could do, but not quite having the follow through to make it happen. I think that there's a resentment that can build within diabetes burnout as a whole, where everything that's required, whether it's like the physical stuff and like having to change out a cartridge or make sure that you have your pen with you or whatever. Last week, I think I spent probably 45 to 60 minutes on the phone with insurance going back and forth about my insulin pump, about, other things, and simply the practical aspects, the time, the physical management, right? And then the moments where you're so overwhelmed that you don't think about the fact that you had 45 grams instead of 15 to treat a low blood sugar. And then you could simply chase the high. You could, I think I've heard the term rage bolus, like you could choose to opt into that. And whether or not you have the emotional bandwidth to say, or the mental bandwidth to back off and do what you should do is really variable. And then there's the grief dimension, where I think most of the time, because diabetes burnout isn't happening in a vacuum where it's the only thing that's going on, it's like all these other things have multiplied and amplified the effects of caring for yourself with such vigilance. I think there's a grief of like, oh, not only am I dealing with X, I'm also dealing with this. I'm also dealing with having to manage myself in this way. And I think the final thing I would mention would be the potential isolation of it. Having grown up, and I mean, I know that I was relatively young. 7 was when I was diagnosed, and growing up, I think I knew 3 other people, not like close people in my life, but I knew 3 other people. As an adult, I know more, but it's not like I'm doing daily life with other type 1 diabetic moms in my real life. That's not part of how my time is spent, and that can be an isolating thing, just to not have that kind of experience with and alongside other people. So today, at least, I don't want to wrap up this video with anything other than that this is what I've experienced. I know that there are things that can be done, and I'll cover that in the next video in terms of like what small things can move the needle forward. But I think that it's helpful just to know that someone else is tired of tracking, tired of dealing with blood sugar management and all of the things that come along with it. If this is you too, if you're tired in this specific way that's hard to explain to someone who doesn't live these experiences, I want you to know that you're not alone, and that this isn't a failure of discipline or a lack of care. I think it's an honest response to a genuinely hard situation, that this is common, not in spite of what you've done, but because of the natural results of constant daily management. My goal is to be here about every week and to talk about type 1 and glucose management generally, about some of the specifics of managing it as a woman, talking about how you do some of the practical changes and shifts with menstrual cycles, pregnancy, postpartum, how you tailor meals to accommodate family life, and more broadly, again, that intersection between management and mental health, and how you can work towards, how you can move the needle towards improving both simultaneously. Thanks so much for being here.